Right then, the highly anticipated Lian Li Q58. I know a lot of small form factor PC enthusiasts have been patiently waiting for this little guy to come out of hiding like an anti-vaxxer waiting for a face mask mandate to be lifted. And that day is here, my friends, so let's get at it. Now, starting with the accessory box it comes with, we get a couple of magnetic mesh dust filters, some Velcro cable ties, in addition to the cable ties already in the case, some zip ties, extra plastic clips, an ATX power supply mounting bracket, which I'll talk about shortly, and of course a shit ton of screws. There's two flavors to choose from, white and black. The black version's front aluminum panel actually has this anodized dual texture finish, with the top half being more of a matte texture and the bottom half lightly brushed, while the white version's front panel sports a plain white coated finish. But aside from that, as far as I can tell, the only other major differences between the white and black version is a black USB port and tinted top glass side panels for the black version, and a white USB port and clear top glass side panels for the white version. Now, after you remove the thumb screws and pop off the top panel, the glass and aluminum mesh side panels on both sides swing open like a DeLorean, or for those of you too young to be Back to the Future movie fans, like a Tesla Model X. What's cool about this though is that you can swap them around, so if you want one side to be all glass and the other all mesh, you can do that. But the orientation options are limited a bit because of these swing tabs on the glass panels. Now, on appearance, it looks like there should be a good amount of airflow with, of course, the side mesh panels, but also the top and bottom of the case being vented. And there's about 21 millimeters of ground clearance from the bottom of the chassis at its highest point and about 11 millimeters at its lowest. On the front, we've got the power button, which has a nice solid haptic click to it, an audio combo jack, USB-A 3.0, and a Type-C 3.1 Gen 2 port with their respective cables already wired and ready to plug into your motherboard. It's a 14.5-liter case and will fit air coolers with a max height of 67 millimeters and 280 mil AIOs with a max length of 315 millimeters. But let's say your radiator's an absolute unit and you need a bit more space. You can actually remove the toolless hot swap SSD tray, which by the way is already outfitted with a SATA cable, and give yourself an extra 10 millimeters for a total of 325 mils of clearance. But what if you wanted to go with an ATX power supply? Well, first you'd remove that top radiator mounting bracket and replace it with the included ATX mounting bracket I mentioned earlier, and then remove the SFX mounting bracket after. But just keep in mind, if you do, you're giving up cooling space, limiting yourself to a 140 mil fan or 120 mil AIO. Now, we've got 4 storage mounting locations. There's the SSD hot swap tray we've covered already, but then there's a removable fan bracket at the bottom of the case, which you can either load up with a 2.5-inch SSD or a 120 mil fan. There's also a hard drive or SSD mounting plate for the top fan mounting bracket, which you can take advantage of if you're using an SFX power supply, but then you're giving up cooling space again and limiting yourself to a 120 mil fan or AIO. And the last location is a sneaky one. Hidden between the SFX mounting rack and the center tray, you can throw in another 2.5-inch SSD. So basically, you can have either 4 2.5-inch SSDs or 3 2.5-inch SSDs plus one 3.5-inch hard drive. But then again, compromises, right? Now on the back, there's this little trap door that has a handy little LED/fan hub mounted on the inside with 3 5-volt addressable LED connectors and 3 PWM fan connectors. And just below that to the right is the extension power cable, and then below that is the 3-slot vertical GPU mounting location, which has 320 millimeters of clearance and comes with either a Gen 3 or Gen 4 PCIe riser cable pre-installed, depending on which cable you choose when placing your order. Now, the build was considerably easier than I expected, starting with Lian Li's new 750-watt SFX 80+ gold power supply, which they wanted me to showcase. So it's small, looks good, has a 0 RPM mode when under 40% load, it's fully modular, and comes with sleeve cables. It's a perfectly fine power supply and I like it. Anyways, installation, super easy with or without cables and or bracket already installed, because there's just like so much space. And because that bottom tray comes right off, you don't have to dick around with stuffing cables in there. But a major tip I wanted to give you guys, move the mounting bracket from the bottom SFX position to the top SFX L position for some added room at the bottom for cables and a 120 mil fan if you plan on mounting one there. Now, once you've got it in there, you might be wondering what the hell to do with that super long internal power cable. Yeah, just tuck it in between the PSU bracket and the center tray, but keep in mind, that's where you'll be running the PCIe cables for the GPU, so you might want to do both at the same time before you get too carried away with the rest of the build. Installing the radiators is easy as your mom. You just slap the mount on top, drop it in, and screw it down. Where it gets a little tricky though is trying to figure out what the hell to do with those hoses. I'm using the Kraken X53 from NZXT, which has a multi-point rotational retention bracket, so I can face the hose leads down to the left and then sweep them up, integrating them into the cable management while utilizing the Velcro cable ties. Now, doing it this way forces the hoses away from the RAM and actually pushes down the 24-pin cable, which then plays a role in making enough room for a fan at the bottom by wrapping the two PCIe cables around the 24-pin cable and the front I/O cables under the power supply, which will prevent it from rubbing on the fan hub. Now, before I install the GPU, I wanted to throw in a 120mm fan on that bottom tray mount, which I've had on the side while I dick around with all that cable management, making sure the whole time to keep this area as clear of cables as possible. And with that, as you can see, there is in fact enough room for a fan without the cables rubbing. You just gotta play with those cables a bit the same way you'd wrestle a fucking crocodile. Now, one thing I encountered while trying to install the GPU was that the riser cable was mounted too far away from the rear slots, but luckily you can loosen the screws a little and just slide in either direction a tad. So if you run into the same issue, don't force it, otherwise you'll break the riser cable and or even the pins on your GPU. Just loosen the screws and adjust as needed. By the way, those PCIe cables are going to be a bit long, so I'd recommend tucking them in between the center tray and power supply in an S shape, which should eat up just enough cable length. Anyways, at the moment, I don't have any full-length GPUs that aren't currently being used right now, so I tossed in this MSI Ventus 2X3070 I have on hand, but as you can see, there's still a ton of room left over for a full length. In fact, if you look at other reviews of this case, everyone else is using various full-length GPUs, so it's a really versatile case. Anyways, blah blah blah, here's the finished build. So I think having a mesh panel at the bottom on the GPU side so the GPU can breathe and a mesh panel at the top on the motherboard side so the radiator can breathe would be ideal, but then you'd have to leave off the glass panel on the motherboard side because the pivot hinge gets in the way. And the power supply would be choking instead of having plenty of fresh air with the mesh panel at the bottom instead. So at the end of the day, mesh panels at the bottom on both sides with an intake fan in the bottom tray really is the best way to go here under most circumstances. You can buy additional mesh panels through a couple of international vendors and have all mesh on both sides, but then that kind of kills that dual texture design language that makes this case look cool. Now, I was kind of expecting some decent thermal results, but stressing the CPU and GPU together for an hour with the fans maxed out, the CPU hit and maintained 80 degrees Celsius with the GPU topping out at 66. And while gaming, the CPU hits around 78 degrees with the GPU averaging around 63 degrees. So while these aren't bad numbers, they're actually pretty average and fall in line with past ITX builds I've done with the same test hardware. Now, of course, you can always use better fans for the radiator than the ones that come stock, and a better fan for the bottom tray than the one I use, which was just laying around, so there's still some tweaking that could be done for even better thermals. Anyways, I think it's a sick looking case, but even though I like the look, it doesn't make like a whole lot of sense to me because you can't really see much with just the top or bottom half being visible, and if you aren't overdosing on RGB lighting, you can't see a bloody thing. But then again, if you go all glass on either side, you're choking off airflow. Personally, while I think the half and half design looks cool, I also think a single mesh panel on both sides would still look great, but also reveal any potential additional airflow to help thermals just that much more. Other than that, the build process wasn't a crazy struggle. I really dig the integrated fan / LED hub, and I think it's got great versatility for both air or liquid cooled builds. And I really dig that dedicated SSD hot swap tray. That's sweet. Anyways, I'll have some product links down below in case you wanted to buy one for yourself, but I think that's gonna do it for this one. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll talk to you all in the next one. Cheers.